Jared, thanks, and good morning, everyone. As Jared said, we're a platform, and I'm going to talk to you first about a couple of the problems that we see at a systemic level, at the industry level, and then our approach to helping kind of solve for that. And so the first thing, my assumption, especially since as I was walking up here, I saw a couple of popped up laptops actually where people were coding. So my assumption is that some folks in here are fairly technical and that the vast majority of folks in the room are creating applications and companies to serve various different stakeholders in the healthcare industry. And so our company is designed to serve you folks, to serve people, whether they are providers, payers, or folks like yourselves that are creating solutions for the healthcare industry. And I'm going to talk about two problems specifically to that. And the first is that so much of the challenge in healthcare actually has to do with the translation of business processes and information crossing stakeholders. So interoperability today is often described in ways that we really think of as being with a little I. It's about standardizing data formats. It's about the ability to take a CCD and move it on over, right? Or take a QRDA file and consume it on some other side, right? It's about transforming and normalizing the data so that somebody can digest and ingest it. And to us, that's really little I interoperability, right? And that's the way that many legacy healthcare applications and solutions have been developed around that notion that the interoperability is determined at that point, at the data point. Right? It's the payload interoperability, right? And so that's the way that much of the healthcare technology world has been architected. And we think that leads to about $25 billion of waste. And I'm going to throw out a couple of examples, right? So in the clinical trials space, today, if you're on the research side of a life sciences business and you want to acquire a data set to perform your analysis to help inform your development process, what you do, you go to any one of a bunch of different data sources, right? Whether it be IMS or anyone else who has a large store of information, and you say, here's what I would like. And they go in the back room through a bunch of technical stuff. They create a custom data set, encrypt it, and they send it to you. So there's two different major problems in that. One is that they're creating that custom data set. Right? And then two is that they're actually sending you the data, right? So you've got operational cost in that first set that says, oh, every time that life sciences business comes to that data broker, they're creating that on a one-off basis. Now they probably have a little bit of kind of reusability if they've been a customer before, but then they actually have to do the transportation. We think there's a significant amount of friction in that business process. You heard the prior speaker talk about quality reporting. So today, quality reporting, if you're a provider organization and you're reporting on your clinical quality metrics, you're reporting that to a variety of different stakeholders. You're reporting it to the government, you're reporting it to accreditation agencies, you're reporting it to your payers, right? You're probably reporting it internally, right? And every one of those requires a different set of applications, and in many cases, requires a different set of vendors to all work off of the same data. So I don't want to get too deep into the specifics of that, but how many of everybody is familiar with MIPS reporting, MIPS quality reporting? Okay, a handful of folks. So this is a program required by CMS for physicians to report in. There is a verified list of MIPS vendors, right? So imagine a world where when you want to file your taxes, right, you have a group of folks called accountants that you have to file your taxes with. Well, that's how you get MIPS done, right? You're going to have to go through an intermediary to get MIPS done. Right? How many people are familiar with STARS reporting? Probably the same folks, right? I think everybody can understand, if they're not deeply familiar, those same quality reporting that is happening to payers. So we heard just a little bit about value-based contracting, right? Underpinning those contracts is some quality reporting that has to happen, right? So whether it's MIPS, whether it's STARS, whether it's HEDIS, there are different vendors all thinking about just a little bit differently about the underlying quality data. Well, that's the very definition of a high-friction kind of business process, right? The data has to move. We're doing the same thing slightly differently with different vendors. I'm going to come back to that, but we think there's a huge amount of friction when you have business processes and technology between the various different stakeholders. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is it sure is hard, I don't have to tell anybody in this room, it sure is hard to write healthcare applications, right? So we're dealing with multiple underlying systems. You can either go out and you can put together a bunch of custom interfaces. The standards, FHIR and the rest, are coming along, but they're not ubiquitous yet. So much of this, again, going back to little I interoperability, is around, oh, well, if we could just consolidate, normalize the data, right? All the effort should be really about putting, then we can just solve everything. So I've got an EDW approach or a data lake approach, right? Or if I'm someone who's trying to solve my business challenge, right? I'm trying to solve for multiple quality programs, I can go have a vendor for each one of my quality programs. And so that's the second problem. And so we took a different approach. For those of you that were coding as I was walking up here, you'll appreciate this. Apervita is a low-code development platform specifically designed for healthcare. So our goal is to make it easier for everyone, again, whether are companies, for-profit enterprises trying to serve the industry, or whether it's payers, providers, or the government, to create applications in 1/10 of the time at 1/10 of the cost of what we do today. And we do that by pre-assembling many of the coding components into the platform. So AWS, who obviously is a partner of ours and we work very, very closely with, right? Couldn't be happier. They're an infrastructure platform, right? Think of us as that application platform that is the next layer up, enabling folks like yourselves and other stakeholders to more easily build applications. And so by having those components assembled and pre-assembling those components with a set of instructions we call blueprints around certain types of applications, think of it very much as kind of configuring that last 20 or 30% of an application. So whether it's ontologies, whether it's tasking engines, whether it is HIPAA compliance, all of the things that everyone here who has a technical solution, there's about 60% of your applications that are common because we're solving for the realities of the healthcare world. And so why is that platform approach easy? Well, or why is it kind of a new, exciting way to get things done? First is it's better, faster, and cheaper to develop applications. All right? Because the tooling is already in place, because we have already put some of the components together, we've provided kind of accelerating blueprints, it's faster to develop. It's also faster to deploy, right? Because we don't have to connect on a one-off basis for the first time. As Jared mentioned, we already have connectivity to 3,000 hospitals. Think of it very much as a network, if you will. And I'll talk a little bit more when we have a couple of examples. It's built, a platform by definition is built for scale, right? We're onboarding 100 hospitals a week onto the platform. And from a business model standpoint, for us, this is not about owning the data. So again, that's the little I interoperability. We think that was kind of the first phase of getting things to work. You got everybody who wants to kind of monetize the data. We're actually not in that business, right? We're about laying down the tracks and enabling people to access the data. We're not here to kind of monetize someone else's hard work or their insights, right? We're here to empower those insights. And it's all about sharing and connecting applications. And so for those of you that have come from outside healthcare, this is old hat. Right? This is not a new concept. So if we wanted to build a website in this room, by the time it has taken me to do this talk, we could put up a website today. Right? We'd go on WordPress and we would have done it. 15 years ago, we would have had to code that from scratch in HTML. Oh, you want an e-commerce engine on that? Well, just plop on Shopify or WooCommerce, right? All of these low-code development platforms have created the ability to create a website that is more robust, more feature-rich, and a fraction of the time and the cost that it used to take. And that's because someone has built, in these cases, these companies here, have taken that approach to providing the platform components and letting you, the end user developers, come on and finish the application there. So let me talk just one more word about us and then some use cases. So we sit in between the various different stakeholders, right? At the end of the day, most folks want to connect to the provider. That's the point of care, right? That's where we can affect the health and well-being of folks. And so whether it is payers, folks like yourselves that are technology providers, regulatory bodies, or performance organizations, we want to be the platform, the connectivity between that and the folks that you see on the right. We've been fairly successful at that. We're on our 4th program with the CDC. We've done a bunch of work for the VA, some of the larger academic medical centers. Really are starting to understand the power of kind of a low-code development platform and what that can allow them to do. So let me talk a little bit about what some of our customers have been able to do. So the Joint Commission, who I'm sure vast majority of folks are familiar with in concept if you're healthcare people, is an accreditation agency, among other things, accredits U.S. hospitals. And up until this year, there were 23 independent vendors who were responsible for acquiring data from all the hospitals that the Joint Commission accredited, grabbing that data, normalizing it, analyzing it, transporting that to the Joint Commission where it got further analyzed and where those reports came back to the underlying reporting organization. That whole process was about a year long. And you had hospitals that had to go through the work to prep the data for the vendors who had to do the work to prep the data for the TJC who had to prep the data, turn around the results back to the organization. All in the name of, in theory, the Joint Commission providing actionable insights on quality to the hospital. The problem with that is that whole process took somewhere between a year and a year and a half. And so how actionable is it? And so the Joint Commission's leadership said, hey, there's a different approach to make this happen. And what we'd like to do instead is we'd like to write an application on the Apervita platform. And so the way this works is the underlying organizations, the underlying hospitals load their data up into the Apervita cloud, which, commercial for AWS, is hosted on AWS, which is completely permission protected. Right? They decide who has access to that. So that's an instance of the data that they have complete control over. They enable that data to be queried by the Joint Commission's application. So it's the application, which is also hosted on the Apervita platform, that queries those various hospital data sets. And so the data never gets transferred. So that's one inefficiency that moves. The other is that we allow for the data to come in at any format, and we map it into the required schema. So there is no kind of mandatory format from a data standpoint. I'm kind of trying to meet people where they are as they upload their data. And so that application can now be run not just once a year, it can be run anytime. And what used to take a year and a half now, if an organization uploads their data and they want to run that application, it now happens in the space of 2 hours. And so they have continual access to the insights provided by the Joint Commission. And remember, the Joint Commission's job is to provide quality insights to the hospital. And before it used to take them 18 months, now they can do it in the space of a lunch break. It happened once a year, now it can happen every day. And that data used to be a transportable asset that took a whole bunch of time to do it. And now it gets uploaded as often as the hospital wants to make that happen. And so what was an industry, roughly speaking, a greater than $300 million problem for the industry is now a $30 million problem. Right? And I think that order of magnitude is part of the power of a platform. I'll give you another example that has a similar order of magnitude impact. A provider organization has multiple regions and has 200 SaaS programmers that are dedicated to grabbing data from those regions, normalizing the data against the 400 KPIs that this organization has defined as their operating and quality metrics, right? Protecting that data in unique ways, despite the fact that this is one organization some high sensitivity to sharing all of the data between the various regions. So they only want to share some information. And so you've got 400 folks making north of $100,000 a year dedicated just to doing the reporting. Right? It's not taking action on the reporting. It's just to assembling the data. So we're working with these folks to write this as an application on the Apervita platform that includes all the data permissioning capabilities that will allow them to rapidly change and modify those KPIs. And the plan is to take those 200 SaaS programmers that are out there today and reassign 90% of them. Because at the end of the project, we think it'll take just a fraction of those folks. So think about all the other projects that those programmers can be working on. So those two were examples where people were kind of using the application internally, if you will. Let me give you a different example, which is Optim, who is both a customer and an investor in the company. What they've decided is, as a commercial enterprise, to develop an application on the platform because of that ease of development and the speed of deployment. So what they estimated would have taken them 12 to 18 months to bring a product to market took them 12 to 18 weeks. We've now signed 2 pilot customers, and this is a product around clinical decision support, kind of clinical pathways, clinical journey, if you will. And they said, listen, we would have taken us at least a year if we hadn't done this with you, and now we're going to be deployed. We're putting our first guidelines in place, and they'll be done by Q2 at a large academic medical center here on the East Coast. And so this is a slightly different example, part of the platform, just like any of those consumer website examples like Shopify or something like that. The platform comes with the capability to monitor and meter and charge for usage of an application. And so much of what you would ordinarily do, the telemetry that is built into all of your applications to understand who's using it in what fashion, is built into the platform, which allows for kind of the commercialization of an application that's built on the platform. So as Jared mentioned at the beginning, what that means is that we've had about half of the U.S. hospitals are using some application that has been built on the platform. And because that doesn't mean that all of these are direct customers of ours. Quite the contrary. We, again, are empowering people to write applications on the platform. Some of those are hospitals. Some of those are payer organizations. Some of those are folks like yourselves that are for-profit enterprises that are serving those entities. But across the board, there are 3,000 or so folks that are now connected to the Apervita platform. So our goal on a go-forward basis is to kind of continue to build out the network. So that means more folks developing those applications, right? More folks that see the value of speed of development and speed of deployment. Excuse me, and then ultimately to increase the usage of those applications, which means making our customers' applications more successful, giving them the tools and the distribution to get those out to market faster, right? To encourage people to see the value of using those applications on a distributed development platform. So let me stop there. I know we've got just a minute or so left. Happy to take questions now or after as well.